There are moments in music history that feel like crossroads, where one simple word changes everything. For Dolly Parton, that word was no. She was 32, a rising country star with a mountain accent and a pen sharper than fame itself. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, had called. He wanted to record her song, "I Will Always Love You." It was 1974. The request should have been an artist's dream, a golden ticket into immortality. But when Dolly heard the condition that Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's notorious manager, would demand half of the publishing rights, she froze. Half of her song, half of her story. The moment stretched into eternity. Dolly remembers sitting alone that night, staring at the ceiling of her Nashville home, tears mixing with defiance. "It broke my heart," she would later say, "but I couldn't let go of the song." In a world where every young artist bowed before the king, she refused to kneel. She hung up the phone, and history pivoted. The king would never record the song. The Queen of Country would walk away heart aching, but spirit unbroken. Decades later, "I Will Always Love You" would echo again. This May through the voice of Whitney Houston, conquering the world in a way no one could have imagined. But before that triumph came the pain. Before the applause came the silence. This is the story of a woman who built an empire not on compromise, but conviction. A story of love, loss, and ownership. The night Dolly Parton said no to Elvis wasn't an act of arrogance. It was an act of survival. Because behind her soft laugh and glittering gowns lived a woman who understood something far deeper than fame. Songs are not just melodies. They are pieces of your soul. That single decision would change the trajectory of her career, her legacy, and even the fabric of country music itself. To this day, people still wonder, what would the world have sounded like if Elvis had sung those words? Maybe his velvet voice would have wrapped the song in seduction and sorrow. Maybe it would have been a classic of another kind. But fate had other plans. Dolly's refusal became her rebellion. Her rebellion became her identity, and her identity became her crown. When asked years later if she ever regretted it, she smiled and said, "No, because if I had given it away, I wouldn't still own it or myself." And that, perhaps, is the truest love song of all. Long before the rhinestones and stadium lights, Dolly Rebecca Parton was a barefoot girl running through the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. Born in January 1946, she was the fourth of 12 children, a family so poor that her father paid the doctor who delivered her with a sack of cornmeal. The Partons lived in a one-room cabin with no electricity, no running water, and a roof that leaked when it rained. Yet inside that cabin was something far richer than gold: a voice, a spirit, and a dream. Her mother, Avie Lee, sang constantly hymns, folk ballads, lullabies that floated over the mountains. Her father, Robert Lee, was a hard-working man who couldn't read or write, but he could make anything grow from the stubborn Tennessee soil. From them, Dolly learned two things: faith and grit. "We didn't have much money," she once said, "but we were rich in love." On Sunday mornings, the Partons would gather in the little Pentecostal church, where Dolly first discovered the power of her voice. She wasn't shy. Even as a child, she would stand on a chair so the congregation could see her tiny frame and belt out hymns that filled the wooden walls. People would smile, sometimes cry. That's when she learned songs could heal people, even if you were just a poor mountain girl. But poverty carves deep. Nights were cold. The children shared one bed. Dolly's clothes were hand-sewn from feed sacks, her shoes often borrowed or broken. She remembers being teased at school for her patched-up dresses, the same dresses she would later recreate this May with sequins and glitter as symbols of pride. "It takes a lot of money to look this cheap," she would laugh years later, but that humor was her armor. The mountains taught her to dream big, but stay grounded. By the May, she was 10. Dolly was performing on local radio. At 13, she recorded her first song. At 18, with her guitar slung over her back and hope burning in her chest, she left for Nashville, the city of broken hearts and country legends. It was a one-way trip. Her family wept as she boarded the bus, her father silently proud, her mother clutching a Bible. Dolly promised she'd make them proud. "I always knew I was meant for something more," she said. "Not better, just more." In Nashville, she was dismissed at first. Her accent was too thick, her look too flashy, her songs too sentimental. But rejection never scared her. She'd been fighting since she was old enough to carry a bucket of water uphill. She played anywhere she could, radio stations, back rooms, local bars, and sent demo tapes to every label in town. What people didn't realize was that Dolly was not just a singer. She was a writer. Her lyrics were honest, unpolished, full of pain and humor, the kind that made people stop and listen. She wrote about loneliness, motherhood, loss, and pride, weaving the same raw humanity she'd grown up around. "If you want the rainbow," she said, "you gotta put up with the rain." That mountain wisdom, carried from the hollers of Tennessee, would later define her career. She wasn't chasing fame, she was chasing freedom. She wanted to own her voice, her words, and her choices. Every hardship she endured, every cold night, every cruel laugh became a note in the songbook of her life. And that songbook would one day hold a ballad that the world would never forget. The little girl in hand-me-down shoes had grown into a woman who could say no to the king, because before she ever met Elvis, she had already learned one truth: nothing is worth more than the right to be yourself. When Dolly stepped off that bus in Nashville, she was armed with little more than her guitar, a notebook, and a smile that could light up a storm. The city was ruthless, crowded with dreamers who sang the same songs and chased the same spotlight. But Dolly's light was different, soft yet defiant, wrapped in that mountain twang and the kind of honesty that made even heartbreak sound hopeful. Her first few months were brutal. She lived in cheap motels, wrote songs for a few dollars apiece, and sang backup wherever anyone would let her. But something about her caught attention, a strange mix of humility and unshakable confidence. RCA Records soon noticed. But before that, a man named Porter Wagoner became her biggest turning point. Porter, already a country star, invited Dolly to join the Porter Wagoner Show in 1967. It was the opportunity of a lifetime national TV exposure, regular performances, and a mentor who could open doors she'd never dreamed of. But it also came with shadows. At first, the two made magic on stage, the older showman and the young mountain girl with the golden voice. Their duets climbed the charts. Their chemistry felt genuine, but behind the scenes, tension brewed. Porter, known for his ego, began feeling threatened by Dolly's growing fame. He wanted to control her career, her songs, even her image. But Dolly had never been anyone's puppet. During those years, she wrote Coat of Many Colors, a song born straight from her childhood, inspired by the patchwork coat her mother had sewn for her. It wasn't just music, it was testimony. When the song hit the airwaves, people stopped seeing Dolly as the glittery blonde and started hearing the storyteller, the poet of the poor. Every hit made her braver. Jolene, a haunting, seductive warning wrapped in tenderness, proved she could craft universes with a single melody. Critics began to compare her to the greatest songwriters of her generation, though she never saw herself that way. "I just write what I feel," she'd say, "and I feel a lot." By the early 1970 seconds, Dolly knew it was time to step out of Porter's shadow. He didn't take it well. Their partnership had become toxic. Part affection, part resentment. So she did what she always did when words failed her. She wrote a song. It was called "I Will Always Love You." She didn't write it for a lover. She wrote it for him. A goodbye letter disguised as a love song. When she sang it for Porter in his office, tears rolled down his face. "That's the best song you've ever written," he said quietly. It was her way of saying farewell, with grace and gratitude instead of bitterness. The song was released in 1974, and it soared #1 on the country charts, sealing her as one of Nashville's most gifted storytellers. Her voice carried both heartbreak and liberation. It wasn't a power ballad. It was a whisper of strength. But the universe wasn't done testing her. That same year, Elvis Presley's team called. The king, he himself, wanted to record her song. For any songwriter, that was Olympus, the moment when your work touched the untouchable. But when Colonel Tom Parker laid down his infamous demand that Elvis would only record it if he received half of the publishing rights, Dolly felt the chill of every poor day she'd ever lived. Half of her song, the song that had been born out of her tears, her freedom, her goodbye. She didn't need T-May to think. She already knew the answer. Her voice trembled as she said no, but her conviction was steady. That song was mine, she'd recall later, and I wasn't going to give it away. The call ended. The chance was gone. For a few days, she wondered if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. But something deep inside told her she had protected something sacred. Years later, that very decision would return to her like a divine echo. Whitney Houston's voice, soaring through The Bodyguard, would turn "I Will Always Love You" into one of the greatest songs in human history. But back then, in the smoky rooms of Nashville, Dolly only had faith and that old mountain stubbornness. She walked away from the king of rock and roll with nothing but her integrity, and somehow, it was enough. Because for Dolly Parton, success was never about who sang her songs, it was about owning her truth. By the late 1970s, Dolly Parton was more than a country singer. She was a phenomenon. The small-town girl from Sevierville had become a global icon, a symbol of resilience wrapped in sequins and sincerity. Nashville had been her springboard, but Hollywood was calling, and Dolly was ready to leap. The girl who once sang barefoot in a wooden church was now stepping into a world of spotlights and skyscrapers. Her transition wasn't easy. Country purists accused her of selling out as she began blending pop melodies with her mountain roots. But Dolly was never afraid of reinvention. "You can't be a butterfly," she said, "if you're scared to leave the cocoon." With songs like "Here You Come Again" and 9 to 5, she stormed the pop charts, proving she could outshine anyone, anywhere, in any genre. 9 to 5 wasn't just a song, it was an anthem. Written for the 1980 movie she starred in, alongside Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin, it captured the frustration of working women everywhere, turning Dolly into both an entertainer and an accidental feminist voice. Her performance as Dora Lee Rhodes, the bubbly secretary underestimated by everyone around her, mirrored her real life. People had mocked her for her looks, her accent, her country charm, but she transformed those very things into her superpowers. Hollywood loved her. So did America. She was funny, smart, disarmingly self-aware, a woman who could make a joke out of herself before anyone else could. "I'm not offended by all the dumb blonde jokes," she said once, "because I know I'm not dumb, and I also know I'm not blonde." But beneath the glitter, Dolly worked harder than anyone realized. She controlled her brand, wrote her own contracts, managed her finances, and quietly became one of the most successful businesswomen in music. She bought back her publishing rights, founded her own label, and built Dollywood, a theme park that celebrated her Tennessee roots and employed thousands in her hometown. Every decision she made was deliberate, a lesson learned from saying no to Elvis. "If you want to fly," she said, "you better own your wings." Her career exploded in all directions. In the 1980 seconds, she collaborated with Kenny Rogers on Islands in the Stream, another chart-topping classic that cemented her crossover appeal. Her duets, Her acting, her philanthropy, everything Dolly touched turned into something luminous. She became the rare artist loved by both the poor and the powerful, the country faithful and the city elite. Presidents quoted her. Children adored her. Other artists feared her pen. But fame, as Dolly knew, is a hungry thing. The spotlight burns as much as it shines. The more famous she became, the lonelier the nights grew. Her husband, Carl Dean, the quiet man she married in 1966, stayed far away from the cameras. They were opposites in every way. She, the dazzling performer. He, the recluse who hated attention. Their love survived not because of proximity, but because of distance. He loves me for who I am, she'd say, and that's rare in this business. Still, the tabloids didn't rest. They gossiped about affairs, cosmetic surgeries, weight loss, and rumors of children she never had. Dolly ignored most of it with a smile. If I worried about what people say, I'd never get out of bed, she joked. But behind closed doors, she fought her own battles, exhaustion, self-doubt, and the haunting fear that one wrong choice could unravel everything she'd built. Yet every time the noise got too loud, she went back to the mountains, to her roots, to silence. That's where I find God, she once said. Not in the fame, not in the applause, but in the wind between the trees. Through the 1,990 seconds and beyond, her influence only deepened. When Whitney Houston's rendition of I Will Always Love You shattered records worldwide in 1992, Dolly sat in her tour bus, listening to the song that had once cost her so much. As Whitney's voice soared, Dolly wept. Not out of regret, but out of gratitude. The song had found its destiny, and she had kept her soul intact. That same year, she earned millions in royalties, but she didn't brag. Instead, she quietly reinvested the money into her Imagination Library, a charity that has since donated over 200 million free books to children around the world. The more I give, she said, the more I feel like I'm doing what I was put here to do. Dolly Parton had reached a kind of fame that few could understand, the kind that no longer needed validation. Her story wasn't about outshining others, but outlasting them. Through authenticity, humor, and an unbreakable code of self-respect, she became a rare thing in show business. Untouchable. And still, through it all, she never forgot the day Elvis called. That single no, that defiant, trembling refusal, had become the foundation of everything that followed. Because if she had said yes, maybe she'd have been a footnote in his story. But by saying no, she became the author of her own. Fame is a mirror that multiplies light and shadows alike. By the time Dolly Parton had conquered both Nashville and Hollywood, she stood atop a mountain of gold, adored, celebrated, and idolized. Yet, beneath the glamour, her reflection began to fracture. She had spent her life running from poverty, from invisibility, from the fear of never being enough. But no one outruns themselves forever. The 1,980 seconds were her brightest years professionally, but privately, they carved scars she rarely showed. The endless tours, the pressure to stay perfect, the demands of an empire she had built with her own hands, all of it began to take a toll. Behind her bright laugh and larger-than-life wigs, Dolly battled something few people knew: depression. I had this big smile, she once admitted, but sometimes I cried all night. She'd become trapped in her own legend. The public expected Dolly Parton, the glittering Barbie of Tennessee, every second of every day. But the real Dolly, the soft-spoken mountain girl who once prayed for shoes, was fading under layers of expectation. She couldn't walk down the street without cameras flashing, couldn't release a song without being told it wasn't Dolly enough. There were health scares, too. The late nights, poor diet, and constant travel began to weaken her body. She suffered from exhaustion and stomach ulcers, and there was one period in the late 1982 when she collapsed during a concert rehearsal. The tabloids invented wild stories, calling it mystery illness, but the truth was simpler and sadder. Dolly was burning herself out. The loneliness was harder still. Carl Dean, her husband, loved her deeply but lived almost entirely out of sight. He stayed home in Tennessee, far from the red carpets and chaos. Some saw it as cold distance, but in truth, it was the quiet pact that had kept them married for decades. He gave her space. She gave him peace. Yet, there were nights when that peace felt like isolation. Rumors of infidelity circled. Dolly was linked to several men in the industry, including long Team A collaborator Kenny Rogers. She laughed them off, as always. "Kenny's the love of my life, but in another lifetime," she said. Still, even her humor couldn't mask the ache of emotional fatigue. She once confessed that at her lowest point, she contemplated ending her own life. The gun was in her hand. Then her dog, Popeye, walked into the room, and the spell broke. "God sent me that little dog," she said years later, voice trembling. "He saved my life." After that night, something in her shifted. She decided to stop hiding behind glitter. She began praying again, not the public kind of faith sung in gospel choruses, but a raw, trembling dialogue between a woman and her maker. She started journaling, writing songs that wouldn't sell but could heal. One of them, "Light of a Clear Blue Morning," became her quiet resurrection, a hymn for anyone who'd been buried by their own success. But recovery didn't mean retreat. Dolly came back fiercer, wiser, with a deeper sense of purpose. She triumphed her schedule, cut toxic people from her circle, and learned to say the same word that had once defined her. "No, you can't pour from an empty cup," she told herself. And, for the first time in years, she listened. Yet even as she reclaimed balance, new challenges arrived. The music industry was shifting. Younger stars like Reba McEntire and Shania Twain began to dominate the charts. Critics whispered that Dolly's era was fading, but she didn't fight the tide. Instead, she bent it. She returned to bluegrass, the sound of her roots, and crafted albums like "The Grass is Blue" and "Little Sparrow," which critics hailed as her most authentic work in decades. She wasn't chasing relevance anymore. She was creating legacy. Still, the physical toll lingered. Years of surgeries, exhaustion, and cosmetic procedures became part of her mythology. People mocked her looks, saying she was plastic. Dolly just smiled. "It takes a lot of work to look this cheap." She'd joke, but behind the quip was truth. Every change, every wig, every sequin was armor. The world demanded perfection, so she gave it to them on her own terms. By the 2000s, Dolly had survived more than most poverty, sexism, industry betrayal, depression, and her own near self-destruction. She'd outlived her critics, her rivals, even some of her idols. Elvis was gone. Whitney was gone. Porter Wagoner, the man who once tried to own her, was gone too. But Dolly kept singing, each performance softer, deeper, almost like a prayer. People began to realize what she had really been all along. Not a caricature, but a cornerstone. A woman who had turned wounds into wisdom, tragedy into testimony. Her private pain had forged something unbreakable: empathy. She poured it into charity, into education, into quiet acts of grace that the headlines rarely covered. During wildfires in Tennessee, she paid the rent for hundreds of families who lost their homes. During the pandemic, she donated $1 million toward vaccine research. She didn't do it for applause. She did it because she'd known what it was like to have nothing. When interviewers asked how she survived every storm, Dolly smiled with that same mountain sparkle. "I don't just survive," she said. "I shine through it." And yet, Even in her light, there was always the memory of darkness, the reminder that her empire had almost cost her soul. But like the phoenix she often sang about, she had risen from her own ashes, carrying both pain and grace in equal measure. The woman who once said no to Elvis had faced far crueler battles since, and every TMA the world tried to take a piece of her song, her pride, her peace. She met it with the same quiet defiance, because for Dolly Parton, survival wasn't an accident. It was an art form. By the TMA Dolly Parton entered her 70s, she was no longer just a performer. She was a living monument. The world saw her as eternal sunshine in human form, a woman who somehow stayed untouched by cynicism. But longevity has a cost, and Dolly had paid it in silence, sacrifice, and stubborn faith. Behind every smile, there were ghosts not of fame lost, but of time itself. Age had changed nothing about her ambition. She still woke before dawn, still wrote songs in spiral notebooks, still planned projects decades into the future. But her purpose had evolved. "I don't measure my life by money or awards," she said, "but by the good I can do while I'm still here." She had outlived many of her peers, and it humbled her. Elvis, Porter, Whitney, each gone too soon. Dolly carried them all like verses in her own unfinished song. Her empire had become vast Dollywood, record labels, publishing rights, perfume lines, a production company. Yet, she remained grounded in the same principle she'd learned as a barefoot girl. Never forget where you came from. Her theme park wasn't just entertainment. It was an economic engine for East Tennessee, employing thousands in the same mountains that once held her family in poverty. When people thanked her, she'd just shrug. "It's the least I can do," she'd say. "Those hills made me who I am." But success, no matter how generous, doesn't protect you from reflection. In the quiet moments on her tour bus, in hotel rooms, or watching the sun rise over her estate in Brentwood, she often revisited that pivotal decision, saying no to Elvis. It haunted her, but not in regret, more like a ghost of what could have been. "I still wish I could have heard Chaim sing it," she once whispered. But maybe that song wasn't meant for Chaim. Maybe it was meant for everyone. When Whitney Houston's version of "I Will Always Love You" became a global anthem, Dolly's royalties soared beyond imagination. But she didn't buy another mansion. Instead, she quietly funneled the earnings into a black neighborhood in Nashville, investing in schools, libraries, and businesses. "Whitney made that song what it was," she said. "I just wrote it. It's only right that her people share in its blessing." That act, unnoticed by many, captured who she had always been: a bridge between worlds. Country and pop, poor and rich, white and black, rural and urban. Dolly's music carried them all, transcending the divisions America loved to cling to. She'd never preached politics, but her compassion had its own kind of revolution. In her later years, interviews often turned spiritual. "Do you ever fear death?" one journalist asked. Dolly smiled gently. "Oh, honey, I don't fear it. I've been preparing for it all my life. You can't sing about heaven and be afraid to go there." But her voice grew softer when she talked about legacy. She didn't want statues or documentaries. What she wanted was continuity for children to keep reading through her imagination library, for poor girls to see her sequins and know they could shine too, for future songwriters to own their words. "Your name fades," she said, "but your work echoes." Even as she aged, her creativity refused to dim. She released new albums, wrote a memoir, and even ventured into rock music, fulfilling a dream she'd carried since the Elvis years. The world watched in awe as the 70-something Dolly outperformed artists half her age, her voice still honey and thunder in equal measure. Still, she knew the curtain would one day fall. "I want to go out on stage, singing," she joked. But there was a flicker of truth behind the laughter. Her entire life had been a performance, not a mask, but a ministry. Music was how she prayed, how she healed, how she gave thanks. Her testament, as she called it, wasn't written in words, but in choices. The songs she refused to sell, the causes she funded quietly, the humility that never cracked. Even when the world called her a saint, she knew her story wasn't perfect. No life lived fully ever is. But it was hers, carved by calloused hands and stubborn heartbeats. She often revisited one memory, the day after turning Elvis down. She'd sat at her piano, hands trembling, wondering if her career had just ended. And then she wrote another song. "You can't dwell on what you lose," she said later. "You build something new from the pieces." That philosophy became the thread running through her life. Resilience as rebellion, kindness as armor. In recent years, documentaries tried to capture her essence, but none could quite define her. Dolly was paradox, made flesh fierce yet gentle, sacred yet sassy, fragile yet indestructible. Her faith didn't shield her from pain. It taught her how to sanctify it. Her voice, once a mountain cry, now carried the weight of 7 decades, softer, wiser, but still trembling with conviction. When she performed "I Will Always Love You" in tribute to Whitney, her hands shook slightly, but her gaze was steady. The song had traveled across TMA, across voices, across lives, and now it had come home. That night, as the crowd rose to their feet, Dolly closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. "Lord," she murmured, "thank you for every no that saved me." It was both confession and closure. The little girl from Locust Ridge had not only conquered the world, she had transcended it. Her testament wasn't carved in marble, but carried in melody the simple truth that freedom, once claimed, can never be taken back. The final notes of Dolly Parton's story hum like a hymn across generations, tender, eternal, and unfinished. When she steps on stage now, under the silver halo of the spotlight, there's a stillness that fills the room before she sings. It's not just admiration, it's reverence. People sense that they're not merely watching a performer, they're standing before a relic of an era when music was still carved from heartache and truth. In a world that burns through idols like candles, Dolly endures, and maybe that's her quiet miracle. She never let the machinery of fame hollow her out. Instead, she turned her image, the wigs, the humor, the glitter, into armor. "I always joke that I look artificial," she says, "but what's inside me is as real as it gets." Her laughter still rolls like a gospel chorus, but it's her empathy that has become her gospel. Decades after her rise, the ripple of her influence touches everything from the stage of the Grand Ole Opry to the classrooms of children clutching books she donated. Entire documentaries have been made trying to decode her magnetism, and every one of them comes to the same conclusion. It isn't talent alone that made her legendary. It's grace. A grace that refuses to bend under cynicism or anger. A grace born from the understanding that gentleness can be revolutionary. But legacy, for Dolly, isn't nostalgia. It's responsibility. "When you're blessed, you're meant to bless others," she said. That's why she still writes songs, hundreds of them waiting in notebooks she keeps locked away, to be released long after she's gone. "I want people to still hear my voice when I'm not here," she once confessed. "Not to remember me, but to remember hope." Her legacy isn't only written in melodies, it's etched in courage. The courage to say no to Elvis. The courage to walk away from exploitation in an industry built on it. The courage to build an empire and fill it not with greed, but with generosity. Those who once mocked her simplicity now study her business acumen at universities. Executives quote her lines. Activists hold her up as proof that kindness can be fierce. And yet, what makes Dolly's story so achingly human is that she never sought sainthood. "I'm just a singer," she says, "who tried to do some good." But maybe that's what holiness really looks like. Not perfection, but perseverance. She's lived to see her name outlive her time, yet she still wonders about the fragility of it all. "When I'm gone," she once told a reporter, "the wigs will go to dust, The sequins will fade. But maybe a child somewhere will hum one of my songs, and that'll be enough. Her words linger like smoke. Because behind them lies the truth that greatness isn't about monuments. It's about memory. Dolly Parton became an icon, not because she was untouchable, but because she was profoundly touching. She sang for the people who worked hard, who prayed quietly, who loved deeply, and who never got their names in lights. In every song she carried the ache of the overlooked. Today, when she looks out from the stage, she sees faces that weren't even born when she wrote her first hit. Teenagers, mothers, old veterans, drag queens, church choirs, all singing together. Her music, once confined to Appalachian valleys, now flows through every corner of the planet. The woman who was once told she was too country became the most universal voice of them all. And yet, for all the applause, Dolly remains the same mountain girl who prays before every show, who still thanks God for letting me shine a little light. Her humility disarms even her harshest critics. She refuses bitterness, forgives faster than most, and somehow turns every wound into melody. I just try to leave a trail of light behind me, she says. That's all we really can do. As her twilight years stretch gently into view, the world clings tighter to her songs, not out of pity, but out of awe. In an age of irony, Dolly Parton is the last living testament to sincerity. She stands as proof that vulnerability, when paired with resilience, can outlast any storm. Her life has become a parable told in rhinestones. Guard your heart, give your love, own your name. The girl who once sang in a one-room church became the matriarch of American music, not because she chased fame, but because she chased freedom. And perhaps the open question she leaves us with is this: in a world that rewards compromise, can we still live with the same kind of integrity? Can we still say no when it costs us everything? Dolly's answer, whispered through time, is the same one she gave on that day in 1974, a soft, trembling, unbreakable no, the kind that saves your soul. So, when the final curtain falls, when her voice becomes only an echo on old records and radio stations, the question won't be whether Elvis could have sung "I Will Always Love You." The question will be, would it have meant as much if Dolly hadn't walked away? Because sometimes history is written not by what we say yes to, but by what we dare to refuse. And that is Dolly Parton's final song, a melody of ownership, love, and rebellion, still echoing through the mountains, still teaching us all how to be free.